Some people collect precious moments dolls. My next guest collects antique vibrators. She's the curator of the Good Vibrations Antique Vibrator Museum in San Francisco, California. The museum's collection dates from the late 1800s through the 1970s and includes devices that look like egg beaters and mini vacuum cleaners. When she isn't busy giving museum tours, her efforts are focused on empowering and inspiring others to discover their own unique sexual profile. Today, she's going to talk about the turn of the century turn-ons and overcome some self-love stigma. Sexy science geek, fruitful author, sexological overachiever, Dr. Carol Queen. Welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm so happy to be with you. Thank you for grabbing my sexological overachiever line out of the ether. I love that line so much.
I really do too.
I'm just a girl who can't say no, only it has to do with collecting vibrators and doing gigs and things like that.
I love it so much. Also, I just love your name. I'm like, do I call you Dr. Queen, Dr. Miss Queen, Dr. Q? I mean, there's so many options here.
So many options. And, you know, I sign my emails CQ, but that makes people who have been in the military think of charge of quarters. And I don't think that's what I am. So as you wish, basically.
I love it. But you do have a doctorate degree in sexology, which I did not know was a real thing. So can you explain what that entails? What's that about?
Oh, I would love to. And let me start by saying that my journey to becoming a sexologist started with that exact moment of, is this a thing? How come I've never heard of this before? And my girlfriend and I were at the University of Oregon library, which before the days of the internet is where you had to go if you wanted to look up graduate schools. And she pushes this catalog across the table to me and says, I think this one is the one that you should attend. And I'm so there. And I was so there just a year or two later. So a sexologist is someone who studies sexuality and either teaches, does research, or does some other kind of professional work around it that is requires more sort of learning and breadth than most other things related to sex do. So a sexologist would be sort of the academic and professional specialist around human sexuality, although plenty of people out there in the world work in some way, as we know, around human sexuality. Look, we're doing that right now in a way, right?
So are you saying I am an honorary sexologist right now?
Would you like to be?
Can I?
Yes. Like, where's my fairy wand? I don't know. Bing. Yes, you're an honorary during this period of time on your podcast when you're delving into sexuality related things in the community and knowledge base and history and stuff, as we're doing now, because in a country and a culture where plenty of people are super interested in sex, some things never really change, but we don't get great information and education about it. Much of the information we do get is sort of has a light touch or a pop culture touch that may or may not be grounded in real information, and often doesn't express diversity very well around sexuality issues. That's what we're here to try to intervene in, right? That's the work that sexologists are generally trying to do. And some teach. Some are clinical sexologists, which is very much like a sex therapist, only without the therapy degree on the top. It's comparable, but not the same. And some, like I do, basically make a patchwork quilt of things that interest us. You know, I basically, like I joked up front, I'm a girl who can't say no. And someone's like, why don't you do this thing? And I'm like, I've never done that before. Let's give it a go. It's something like some people do in bed, right? Some people, nobody's ever had to do that before. What would that be like? And then hopefully people, you know, can make an informed decision, can negotiate a little bit, can do some enthusiastic consent, and then they may learn something. So that's what I like.
I love that so much. And I love that the museum is kind of like that perfect example of the cross-section that you were talking about between pop culture and education, because it's a very pop culture idea to have a museum filled with vibrators. But it's also now that, in preparing for our talk, when I looked into you and read about the wide variety of educational platforms that you participate in, I realized that what you bring to the table is that educational piece. And if anyone were to, talk with you for 5 minutes, I'm sure that they would learn something. So I'm so excited for you to share. And let's start with how the museum started, because I read that people used to send in or mail in or bring in vibrators that they found at like estate sales. Is that still happening?
Yeah. Yes, it is still happening. And I just heard from somebody 6 weeks or so ago, and they're like, is this a vibrator cleaning up my grandmother's house? I'm like, sure is. Is it worth anything? Like on eBay, it might be worth something. It depends on the day, right? You too can have your own collection of antique vibrators depending on the day and your wallet. And I would, just in case I sparked any like collectors out there, be really careful if you're going to plug those things in. The cords are not all good anymore. Don't burn your house down. Please be careful. I want everyone to be careful all the time if possible, because then, we live longer, we learn more, we get curious about more things. So at the very beginning of Good Vibrations time on Earth, 44 years ago next month, as a matter of fact, as we speak, or actually in March is our birthday. 45 years ago, Joni Blank, the founder, set up her collection of antique vibrators, about 6 of them, from estate sales and flea markets. And she put a sign over the top that said Antique Vibrator Museum. It was the smallest vibrator museum in the universe. It might have been the smallest museum in the universe. It was very small, just the size of a small old bookshelf. And people flocked in to marvel at these items that they didn't know existed. Because what Joni wanted to do with this, it was both pop culture and sexological at the same time, because you're very right. This is a pretty pop cultural thing. The Ice Cream Museum in San Francisco is closed, but we haven't yet. So
yes,
let's San Francisco remains San Francisco, everyone. We're trying. So Joni wants to show the following. She wants to show that these items that she's selling to people in here now have a history. They weren't just invented a minute ago. There's tools of the feminist sex revolution or whatever people thought they were. And because of that, she thought that encountering the items themselves would do the work for her. And really they did. They were part of the attraction of coming to Good Vibrations, even if there were only a few of them. And that's when people started bringing in a rolled up brown paper bag, like an old school lunch bag, putting it on the counter saying, hey, I found this, do you want it? Boom, and leaving.
That's amazing.
Sticking around to tell us a little bit about Aunt Alice and how rad she was. And oh my goodness, I found this under Aunt Alice's bed. And I just want to say right now, you might be going to ask me this, but let me just say it. We don't know if any single vibrator in the collection, with a very few exceptions, has a history as a sex toy. Because vibrators, of course, vibrate and massage. And if you never bring them down below your shoulders, you've still enjoyed one of the health-related wonders of a vibrator, right? Regardless of what decade it is, what century it is, what you use it for. If you're not using it sexually, then it's not a sex toy for you. And we don't know about Aunt Alice. We honestly don't.
Yeah.
So, we clean them up nicely. We put them in the museum. And I said that there was one exception. And let me just tell you what it is, because it's amazing. I get a box with a letter typed up. This is about 10 years ago, maybe 12. Hi, I'm from an old sex commune in San Francisco. And we guys in the commune decided that we were going to build a vibrator for our old ladies. That's what we called girlfriends and wives in those days.
God.
Don't bring that terminology back, if you would, please. And the old ladies got a vibrator. I don't know how many old ladies there were, but they got a vibrator. That is the ugliest vibrator. No offense, hippies. Ugliest thing you've ever seen. It's clearly built in the back shed. Its handle Please look it up in the museum on the website, people. You're going to marvel at this. Its handle is an old saucepan handle from the 1950s or 60s. Like grandma used to make us hot chocolate in a Revereware saucepan handle. I say Revereware, and people are picturing that little curl at the end. Yes. And we call it the hippie homemade. It is a DIY pre-maker culture, because maker culture isn't new either, folks. It's amazing. I love it so much. It's like my double favorite. I have triple favorite. I have three favorite vibes, and that's the one that has the best story. Though,
okay, I'm definitely looking that one up. But you also, I have insider information that you may have brought one for show and tell today. Do you have something to share with the class?
I do. And if anyone who is listening to you has already taken a look at the Vibe Museum, they will see that the oldest vibes in the museum are not even electrical at all. They are hand crank. Now, electrical vibrators show up right after steam-powered vibrators, a technology that actually they didn't stick around with. But the earliest like technological vibrators, not just mechanical, because hand crank are mechanical, were steam, then electricity, once electricity was invented. And the hand crank ones, some of them looked something like this.
That looks like a kitchen tool.
Like this. Yes. You probably could make whipped cream. You put on that that grandma made in the pan that they used to make the vibrator out of.
Oh my gosh.
Basically an antique wood doorknob, sort of.
Yeah.
And it, just in case, if this is about the size of a wooden doorknob, it is smooth, fear not. And people look at these vibrators, these old vibrators, and they jump to a conclusion about their sexual use, which is, I'm supposed to put that where? And I just want to clarify, this is an external body device. It's not intended to fit inside anybody's body anywhere. You could do that and do this, and I don't even know, but if you did, you'd better put a condom on it, and that's not what it was made to do, and that's not what it's for. External, like maybe you're doing it on your shoulders, or external clitoral or external genitalia stimulation, right?
Yes.
If someone is using it for that purpose. Because form follows function.
Form follows function. Well, that's all we need to know today, folks. We can sign out. Form follows function. That's a wrap. Oh my God.
When I was thinking about being an architect, which clearly I didn't go do.
Okay. So for those of you who are just listening and can't see what Carol is showing, it is a kitchen looking device with a hand crank. It's wood and metal, and the top part of it does look like a wooden doorknob with a flat surface, and it vibrates as she cranks the handle. So for other historical vibrators, as far as they are concerned, I did have a question sent in by a listener that sent me on a really fun rabbit trail, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. The theory is that Cleopatra made the first vibrator out of a hollowed out gourd filled with bees. Have you heard this?
I have also heard that it was a papyrus box filled with bees, which, as long as the whatever glue they used to put the box together stayed glued, would have been a fabulous idea for everyone except the bees. Gourd too, fabulous idea for everyone except the bees. But don't tell the bees today, who are feeling stressed out as it is, that happened. They'll just get upset. And yes, I've heard that. Do I know or not whether it is historical fact? I do not know whether that is historical fact or excellent historical fiction, but it has been floating around the world of antique vibrator fans for decades now. I think I must have first heard it from Joni Blank when I started working at Good Vibes in 1990. So it's at least a 30, 40-year-old theory, if not a good deal older. And let's just, some people out there may not have ever used a vibrator. The sensation is essentially a kind of a buzz, right? It's some vibrators would feel nothing like a papyrus box or a gourd full of bees, but the vibration that the bees would generate is a vibration. So it's a variant. There is, in fact, a physiological reason that we might like this kind of, whether it's bees, whether it's, I choose vibrators personally. I want to leave the bees to do their good work in the world. But we have nerves that reach from our brain down our spine to our genitals that can feel. The nerves are specialized to feel vibration. And we ask ourselves, why would we have vibes? Or why don't we have nerves feel vibration? I don't actually know the answer to that. Did it have to do with herds of early buffalo running across the savannah and people feeling the vibration in their body? I don't know, but it's great that they're there, because that's the real reason that people have turned to vibrators as a fun and pleasure-filled experience for genital sensation, and not just an awesome invention for your tennis elbow.
So you're saying for tennis elbow, sorry. So I just got that. So you're saying that vibrators, the reason that they have been popular throughout history, not just for genital pleasure, but for whatever, massagers. I just know in the 50s they were like really huge. It's because that it actually provides a full body sensation, specifically by this head to toe nerve you're talking about.
Right. So the nerve is something that, all of our nerves all over our body, whatever they're attached to, we've got nerves that make our eyes work. We've got nerves that make our ears work. If we're not, alternatively, and of alternative anatomy, so that we don't have those working. But for most of us, the nerves for touch, nerves for all kinds of sensation, all 5, 7, or 20 senses, however many we have nerves that are associated with them, and this specialized nerve is associated with vibration. Before vibration, and in addition to vibration, it's associated with the kind of vibration that we can provide ourselves, like the rapid movement of quick rubbing is also a form of vibration. And so that would be a sensation that some people might use to mask pain, because vibration and also even sexual arousal and orgasm, in fact, mask pain. Awesome. But you can't offer that treatment to anyone. That's a personal
right. But
decision.
Wait, didn't they used to? Wasn't that a part of the vibrator history of treating women's quote unquote hysteria?
Well, yes, you were actually right about that. I just backed into that fun fact, didn't I?
You did. I mean, that really seemed like a low pitch for me, but folks, that was not planned.
You got it. And I didn't even know I was pitching. So it's sort of a you got. All right. Well, let me explain that part, because that part is, wow, that part is sort of why our museum really exists, because this is the stranger than fiction backstory that we learned from one intrepid researcher, Rachel Maines, whose book is called The Anatomy, the Technology of Orgasm. And it's about the history of vibrators. So long before vibrators had been invented as mechanical or other kind, like something you could plug in, something you could put a battery in, recharge, whatever, there were doctors who worked with women on the belief system that clitoral massage to the point of hysterical paroxysms of relief. What I call an orgasm on a Saturday night, hysterical paroxysms of relief would help relieve the symptoms of hysteria, an ailment that they had believed in since the time of Galen and Hippocrates, the great Greek fathers of modern medicine. Well, Galen was Turkish. He was an immigrant. But anyway, he and all of his guys set about to try to figure things out. And he decided that what was the problem with women was that our uterus would come detached and roam around the body, causing trouble wherever it went. As the great science writer Mary Roach puts it in her book, Bonk, like a badger roaming around in its den.
Oh, Lord.
And that, I think everyone who is listening, whether or not they've ever had a uterus, if they've ever known anyone with a uterus or whatever, Like, that's an evocative phrase right there. If that were really happening, it would be trouble. And so after a hysterical paroxysm delivered by hand, this motion that I showed you earlier was essentially what the doctors were doing till they all got carpal tunnel syndrome and they had to hire midwives. Because you do that all day long. At the end of the day, you're like,
oh yeah, poor doctors.
Right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was as a labor-saving device for these physicians largely that vibrators were developed and were embraced by them. And it was only a generation or so later that, great aunt Alice got access to buy a vibrator to keep at her own home. And before then, they were medical devices. And people say, oh, no, they were always sex toys. Well, maybe they were, but there also is a documented history of this kind of use throughout the medical world. So, okay, a clever person will put something up against their body to try to find out if it feels nice, won't they? I mean, that's just human nature. But
right.
But the idea that these were developed to be sex toys primarily, there wasn't enough of an economy of purchase. There were talk about supply chain problems now. They didn't have good supply chains for vibrators 150 years ago. Some people with money doubtless had them and used them for that purpose, but the doctors had this access that others didn't. So then they show up at the World's Fair around the turn of the 20th century, and all of a sudden the people are making them a little smaller. They're portable. Some of them come in a little box, a little handle, a little velvet inside. They're fancy. They're pretty expensive, but by 1917, electric vibrators for individual consumption are the commonest electrified appliance in American households, more so than the electric toaster.
Interesting. Okay, so what does it say about the attitudes towards sex and really the quality of sex that people were having prior, I don't know, just back then, that they didn't know what a female orgasm looked like, and that, I mean, was sex that bad for these ladies that, do you see where I'm going with this? I don't even know how to word this question.
I do. And let me just cut to the chase and say, often it probably was. That's super sad. But remember, it's that bad for some people now. Aww. Because I'm going to put my sexologist hat right back on here. Not just a hoarder of old vibrators. I went to school to think about these things. And what I want to share is, if you don't get good sex education, if you don't have access to it, if you have access to pop culture level sexuality, you may not, in fact, get enough information about pleasure functioning, and you may not know who to trust, right, out in the wilds of the interwebs. So that's a challenge. It's a wheat from the chaff challenge now. It used to be there just isn't enough information, and you had to bust into a university library to get most of it, right? Now it's sort of totally the opposite, and yet people don't necessarily come out of it with enough understanding to function the way that they wish they could, that they believe they ought to be able to. Roughly 75% of women now, or people with vaginas, let's say, don't orgasm ever or routinely during penis and vagina intercourse. And that doesn't necessarily have anything, that's not a harsh on the penises and the people attached to them. It's what we think is normal functioning is the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we should know about the body and its responses. So in certain ways, it's not surprising that the doctors figured this out first. What is surprising is that it appears that the doctors didn't figure out, at least not all of them, that there was a sexual response going on. That wasn't what they were expecting either. There was one doctor called Nathaniel Highmore I think this was in the 18th century. He was like, are we sure that this is not an orgasmic response? This was still, when people were doing the treatment by hand, and apparently all the rest of the doctors said, "Oh, Nathaniel, don't be daft." It was not in the mix that you could compare women's sexuality and sexual functioning and responses with male or anybody else of any other gender. That just wasn't delved into. We figured out the thing about the wandering uterus and figured we had it nailed down, I guess. I don't know. And then who got information that was this was high level information. In certain respects, it still is. And what I think many sexologists really desire is for people to get pleasure inclusive as well as medically correct information from the get-go.
Well, yeah,
because
it seems like both under and over information can facilitate stigma. And that's the tragic part. When there was too little information, there was a problem. And now, as you said, with so much information you have to sift through, you have a different kind of stigma happening. So it's really confusing. And I'm curious from your perspective, how connected, I'm sure they're connected, but how connected are the stigmas around vibrator use and masturbation? Do you think they're completely connected? Are they related? Are they cousins?
Certainly think they're at least cousins. No, I think they're siblings. I think there is stigma around masturbation regardless of how it's done. And that stigma lives really adjacent to this normative idea that if you're going to have sex, it should be with a person. Someone you love, someone you're committed to, someone you're married to, depending on who you ask, right? That's a moving target. But the underlying normativity is this is to share with someone. And if you don't, you can't get someone to do that with you. And, that's ridiculous because many people can, in fact, find people to do something with them. And they still don't necessarily have an orgasm. And vibrators are designed to stimulate without all of the other things going on that happen during partner sex, much of which is wonderful distraction. Wouldn't trade it for the world, but it's not the same activity as masturbation. It too is related, but it's not the same thing. So even that is knitted into this idea that there's a particular kind of way to be a sexual person. And of course, there are many different ways to be a sexual person. And we want them to be focused on consent and well-being and health and things like that. But that's not the message. That's not the detailed message is not what people get in sex education. And so are we surprised when they take a look at some porn to see if they could figure out how the body parts fit together and stuff like that? And it's like, wait, there are more body parts in this porn movie than you're probably going to wind up starting with when you get going. You just jumped ahead in class. And also, it's not a class.
Oh, yeah.
Entertainment. It's like, as I always love to say, it's like a car chase movie, only that's a trained professional. And if you try to drive your car like that, tragedy could ensue.
Yes, there will be an accident. Yes. Well, I love what you said about masturbation and sex are different activities. I think that is so lovely. And before we wrap up, I would love if you wouldn't mind to address some I would say stigmas or concerns that seem to be common around the idea of vibrators, since, you are the curator of the Vibrator Museum. Would that be okay?
It would be fine.
Okay, so it'll be like rapid fire-ish. So the first one is, first concern is if I use a vibrator, I'll become uninterested in my partner because I'll be addicted to the vibrator.
Well, we hope that your partner has some lovely qualities aside from the idea that they might give you an orgasm, because if they don't have any other good qualities, get a new partner that you could feel a little closer to. But honestly, the level of efficiency of a vibrator is truly different from a human being's body, and it's not the same thing. So you can do both. You can have a vibrator, you can have a lovely partner, you all can play together with the vibrator because they might like it too.
The second one is I'm afraid I'll hurt my partner's feelings if I tell them I want to use one.
Please remind them that it's not the same thing. It's different. It's like if you were making bread, but you had to build a fire to cook the bread instead of putting it in the oven. It's just different.
I love it.
Use your own metaphor, but also that your partner cares about you having pleasure is great. This is just one more source of pleasure exploration and understanding each other.
And then I'm worried I will deaden my nerves over time.
So if you press a vibrator against yourself hard, as some people are prone to do when they're reaching for an orgasm, because it feels really great in the moment, you will feel numb at the end because you just pressed something against nerves. When you lean on your hand too long, when you don't have a chair and you had to sit on the floor, same, your hand goes numb and then it wakes up again. So that's what happens with the genitals when they get smished. And it is not a long-term issue. It's a temporary issue as far as we know. If science tells me anything different, I will change my answer. But so far, science is not.
Okay. And then the last one is maybe, you can direct us to some resources, is just being intimidated about choosing a vibrator.
So it's not surprising if people who haven't played with one are intimidated, because there are lots of different vibrators out there. If you look at them, on the goodvibes.com website or wherever people go to look at their vibrators, if you've got a store in your neighborhood that you could go and walk in, that's cool. You can look at them and see how big they are and this and that. But think about how you want to use it first. Is it something that you would enjoy penetration with? Then there's going to be a certain size and shape that will be one that you will enjoy better. Is it clitoral stimulation, stroking it along the penis, same nerves, basically. So maybe a different shape. Maybe the same shape would work for people of any gender configuration. So think about those things. If you can, shop someplace where you can ask questions, because the people who sell the toys, particularly if they're a store like Good Vibrations, a woman-owned store, even if they're not only selling to women, because mostly that's not the case anymore. It's everybody might want to play, but the people with the most skin in the game and experience talking about this set of issues so far in the modern history are the women who have decided to turn to selling sex toys because they want themselves and everybody else to have more pleasure in their lives. So they're a good source of this information. And the final thing that I would say about this is, if you can find some place where you can actually communicate your questions, Good Vibrations has an option to sign up with my wonderful colleague, educator Andy, and you can ask questions about the stuff. And Andy's like, oh, it sounds like these are the 3 things that you might like the most, from a long-term knowledge base. That's great. If you've got friends that you can ask questions of, and if you're Chardonnay people or whatever you are, fine, except just know that your best friend's best vibrator might not be the one that you would like. We are different in terms of what we respond to, which is why there are a bunch of different kinds of vibrators out there.
I love it. That was so helpful. Okay. And now that we've gotten all of our concerns out of the way, hopefully, maybe people have more, but maybe they can stay in touch with you or stay in touch with the Good Vibrations store. How can they do that?
Well, goodvibes.com is where the vibrators and the wonderful educator Andy that I just mentioned can be found. And there's click the bottom button to ask me a question. I don't always get to them immediately. And if they're a question that we've heard many, many times, and many people have those kinds of questions, it might even be that somebody will scoop it up out from under me and answer it before I can even get there, which is great because you get the information sooner. I can be found on Twitter at Carol Queen. I'm on Facebook. I've got a page over there. I'm on Instagram, and gosh, I think my name is Carol Queen PhD on there, pretty sure. Good Vibes is also on Instagram and Twitter and all those things. Good Vibes Toys is what we go on social media. So there are plenty of ways to sort of vibe in. Also, speaking of vibes, I wrote a book for Good Vibrations, and you can find it on the Good Vibes site and elsewhere too. It's called The Sex and Pleasure Book, Good Vibrations Guide to Great Sex for Everyone. And it's got some of the history that we've talked about here. It's got a lot of the info about the toys. So I think people would enjoy seeing that and sort of looking at a fairly wide-ranging book about sexuality. It's like a good resource for the home, as a vibrator used to be in 1917.
Oh, that's so perfect. I'll make sure to link all of that in the notes. And then if you are a fan of the show and you're already getting my emails, you'll be getting an email with all the tips that Carol talked about, plus the clickable links, kind of cliff notes and clickable links. And if you're not already on that subscription list, you can text REAL to 66866 if you're in the United States. And if you're elsewhere, you just go to my website, which is meredithforreal.com. Thank you so much, Carol. That's a wrap. Hey, you're still here. That's awesome. I hope to see you next week too. I talk with the most interesting people that you've probably never heard of. Most of them are paradoxical and bring an opportunity for you to grow as a person. So if you like bright, meaningful entertainment, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications.